Howdy folks, Deacon Parsons here. This is part 2 of 3 of my advice to modern men. I'm going to tell you the stories of 4 of the 6 men who were huge influences in my life and in me building my manhood. I want to make clear up front that these stories are the men as I remember them. It may not be the way they appear to anyone else or how anyone else perceived them, just me. This is not an unbiased critique of their lives. This is what I saw and how they affected me. Obviously, this is a highly condensed telling of these tales. These gentlemen currently share one attribute: they are all dead. Their stories are finished. I'm going to start with my paternal grandmother's brother, Uncle Tuck. He taught me the first major life lesson that I can consciously remember. I've always liked guns. I was about 6 or 7 when Grandma told me her brother had brought home some guns from the war, and she thought one of them might be a Luger. She saw Tuck and talked him into showing me his pistols. Turned out he had 2 Lugers and a P-38 in their holsters. I don't know how to describe the first time I held a Luger. The meticulous and exact craftsmanship, the deep blue of the finish, the elegant and yet somehow sinister profile was intoxicating. If you're a collector of fine items, you have experienced the way an item can speak to you. It's beyond lust, beyond reason, and beyond words. It is a profound and visceral connection. Uncle Tuck saw this in my eyes and immediately regretted letting me see the pistols. In all the wisdom of my years, I suggested that since he had 3 pistols and only 2 children, he should give me one, preferably right now. He said no. Not to be deterred, I let him know that I would be buying one. What he said next had me pondering for years. Quote, "No, son, the old boys who gave me those pistols paid too high a price to sell them for money." Unquote. This was the first time in my life I can recall being confronted with the idea that money couldn't buy something. I grew up on a farm. Everything we did had a commercial aspect. Yes, the calves we raised were pets, but we raised them to eat or to sell. And how could somebody pay a high price when they gave something away? Over the years I discussed this with family members, and I finally got the full story. My father was born in 1938. When the war came, Uncle Tuck wasn't married and had no children. Tuck made the decision to have my grandpa farm his land and stay at home with the family, and Tuck would join the army and go to war. Uncle Tuck risked dying in the war to keep Grandpa from being drafted, just so his sister wouldn't be a widow and my dad wouldn't be an orphan. I never got a war story out of Tuck. Almost nobody did. We know very little about his service. Here's what I do know. Before he went into the service, he was a cat skinner and was assigned to drive a tank. He always held a grudge against his country because when he was in training, they told him that the Shermans were the best tank on the battlefield. Well, by the time he got to Europe, the Germans had fielded the Panther and Tiger tanks, both of which seriously outclassed Shermans. It took at least 6 Shermans to take out one Tiger, and 5 of those Shermans would be destroyed doing it. We don't know how many tanks Uncle Tuck got shot out from under him, but he lived through it and came home. We don't know if he was at Normandy. We do know he was at the Battle of the Bulge. We know that he was under Patton's command at some point and hated Patton with a passion. We know he had at least 1 Purple Heart and a Star for Valor. Now, I saw the star once, but I can't remember if it was bronze or silver. What we put together from what he did say was this: that the pistols, the dagger, the rifle, and the other trophies he sent home were from men he killed in close combat. It took me years, but I finally found out how the old boys who gave him those pistols paid such a high price that it couldn't be sullied with money. Uncle Tuck left a lot of himself on the battlefield. He carried a heavy load for the rest of his life. Grandma never forgot what Tuck did for her and never let us forget to respect it either. The second man I want to talk about is my maternal grandmother's brother, Uncle Chet. Uncle Chet was a World War I veteran who contracted tuberculosis while in the service. He was moved to the death house, but being the stubborn Kansas farmer that he was, he didn't die. However, he was never able to do a full day's work again. Remember, in 1917, Kansas, farming was manual labor. He was mustered out in full disability, which was barely enough for one person to survive. Uncle Chet never married because he could never support a wife and family. Tell me again about white male privilege. After the Army, Uncle Chet lived with his parents on the farm while my grandma and grandpa took care of the folks. My mother was born and was a young girl while they were on the farm. When great-grandma and grandpa died, Chet continued to live with grandma and grandpa, my mother, and her sister. When I came along, he was living in the basement of this very house. Grandma and grandpa owned the house, but downstairs was Uncle Chet's domain. Uncle Chet was what people called an ornery cuss. We lived in a hard land. He lived a hard life, and he was kind of hard and prickly. I don't know if he ever hugged anyone or kissed anyone ever, even my mother, who he doted on. Us grandkids didn't realize why Uncle Chet was the way he was. We didn't realize all that he'd gone through. He was just Uncle Chet. He'd always been that way, and that was the way he was supposed to be. To a lot of people, Uncle Chet was a mean old man. But us kids knew better. Uncle Chet loved his family, and especially us kids. Uncle Chet had a huge 5-drawer chest of drawers, and the top drawer was always full of bubble gum to the brim. Not the cheap stuff either. Double Bubble and Bazooka bubble gum. You could not chew all the bubble gum up. There were 9 of us grandkids. We tried. Uncle Chet didn't treat us like kids. If we asked him a question, he answered it. Now, he smoked a pipe, and it fascinated us. When we asked about the Zippo lighter, he showed us how it worked, how to replace the flint, how to fill it up, and went out and bought more fluid because we burned a lot of fluid playing with the lighter. On those occasions that we would manage to light something on fire, he'd just put it out and tell us not to do that anymore. When we asked about smoking a pipe, he showed us how to put the tobacco in the pipe, light it, and smoke it. I was about 6 or 8 when I told Uncle Chet that I wished I could smoke the pipe upstairs. He told me to go up and tell my dad that I was old enough to smoke. Being a dumb kid, that's exactly what I did. My dad explained to me the errors of my ways, and Mom went downstairs to give Uncle Chet a piece of her mind. Chet cut her short and said, "If you want them kids down here, then don't send them down here." Uncle Chet taught us about pocket knives. He would let us whittle with his knife and make us clean up the shavings. One day, my cousin and I were behind the couch. It was covered with that black gauzy fabric that is almost but not quite see-through. We asked him what it looked like behind the fabric. All he did was toss us the pocket knife. Well, one of us made a small slit and we looked in, and then the other one had to make a small slit because you had to be fair about it. And it was simply too much fun to stop, so we ended up cutting the back of the couch to shreds. I don't know if Grandma ever found out, but we never did get in trouble. It's hard to put into words what Uncle Chet taught us. As children, we never really knew he was disabled. When we were in Uncle Chet's domain, we weren't treated like children. Uncle Chet taught us not to be scared to try. If we had a question, ask, and he would answer. Even if he was cross with us, there was an underlying respect for us. He never made us feel small or stupid. Uncle Chet was Uncle Chet, and you took him or left him on that basis. Despite all he had working against him, he was his own man, even living in the basement of his sister's family home. The next man on the list is my maternal grandfather, Grandpa Jack. Grandpa Jack had a bulletproof smile. He was always happy. There wasn't a problem in his life that got him down, because there was not a problem in his life that he couldn't lick. Grandpa Jack graduated the 8th grade in 1929. More schooling wasn't possible due to the Depression. Grandpa believed in hard work, taking care of his family, and enjoying life. Grandpa Jack was what was called a figurer. He planned and calculated everything. I remember when he got a hand crank adding machine and an entire box of paper to make his work easier. If I was there, I got to pull the crank and help. To give you an example, when Grandpa planted wheat, he knew how many rows his drill planted in each time he went down the field. He knew how many times he went down the field. He knew how many seeds per foot the drill was set to plant. He knew his germination rate. He got an almanac and got his best guess on what the weather would be. From this, he would calculate his expected yield. A couple of weeks after planting, Grandpa knew how much grain he would have to harvest. He would research historic grain prices and grain futures, and by the time harvest came, he would know how many bushels he'd have to sell to pay off immediate debts, and how much he would hold until the price was at its expected high, and he would sell that for profit. He had a plan A. He had a plan B for probable variables. He had a plan C for improbable variables. And he had a plan D for disasters. He did the same thing with the fat cattle we ran. Come fall, he would look at everything, cattle prices, the ground we had for pasture, etc., and decide if we could make a profit running cattle over the winter, how many we could sustain on what we had, when to move them into the corrals to finish feeding them out and sell them. He would take me to the livestock auction and try to get me to bid on a calf, but the auctioneers just talked too fast and I couldn't keep up. When it was time for me to start school, Grandma and Grandpa moved to town so we could move to the home place because the schools were better there. Grandpa Jack was happy and hungry for life and its challenges. He was certain that whatever come his way, he could still conquer it. He would work hard but also take time to enjoy life and the family. The fourth man in my list is my maternal grandfather, Grandpa George. He was the only one of my grandparents who was not born a farmer. His father came over through Ellis Island as a teenage boy with the proverbial $20 in his pocket to live with relatives. His father was a businessman who owned a car dealership in the 1930s in Kansas. Grandpa George was able to make it through high school, then took a job with the Rural Electric Cooperative. He started out as a pole climbing linesman and ended up as the chief engineering consultant for the REA. Grandpa George, being the son of a retail businessman and eventually the chief negotiator for right-of-way easements for the REA, placed great emphasis on social graces and people skills. Showing respect for others, please and thank you, table manners, and in general being able to navigate society when necessary, especially dining out. Grandpa was very big on showing respect. Every person deserved at least a basic respect. We were expected to thank Grandma for fixing meals. We were expected to clean up after ourselves and to help out when and where we could. Look with our eyes, not with our fingers, and in general behave like ladies and gentlemen when and where appropriate. Grandpa taught me one of my important life lessons on the subject of ladies and gentlemen. My little sister was tormenting me and I reacted to her. Grandpa took me aside and told me, "A gentleman doesn't treat a lady that way." My smart aleck reply was something along the lines of, "That isn't a lady, that's my sister." Grandpa's comeback hit me like a ton of bricks. A gentleman doesn't treat a lady like a lady because she's a lady. A gentleman treats a lady like a lady because he is a gentleman. In the conversation that followed, Grandpa explained that how I treated others wasn't a reflection of who they were, it was a reflection of who I am. Never let someone make me something other than who I am. Never let someone make me small. If I just react, the other person is actually controlling me and making me into who they want me to be, not who I want to be. He said, no matter what happens, don't just react. Always think and then act in a way that is consistent with who and what I want to be. It was one of the best lessons in manhood and leadership that I can consciously remember. I'm going to end part 2 here. Please like, share, and subscribe if you find this useful and you are so inclined. This is Deacon Parsons saying, love your maker, love your mate, and do what's right because it's right, and devil take the hindmost.